Part 4. Marco Polo's Revelation to the West. He traveled farther than any man of his age. Through deserts that swallowed armies. Across mountains where even the sky seemed to freeze. Into a world so vast, so alien, that his own words would later sound like lies. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who went east in search of fortune and came back having discovered faith. Not in God, not in kings, but in paper. Yes, paper. The flimsy, weightless miracle that defied the logic of his age. The same Europe that still chained its wealth to metal could not imagine money that could bend, fold, or burn. Yet Polo had seen it held, it spent it. And what he saw in the court of Kublai Khan would haunt the Western mind for centuries. He called it the marvel of the world, because it made no sound when dropped, no shine when lit. Yet it moved empires as easily as gold once did. When Polo first entered the Mongol capital, he expected barbarism. What he found was administration a machine of power so disciplined that it could turn tree bark into trust. In the great hall of the Yuan dynasty, scribes dipped brushes in ink black as the night and pressed imperial seals upon sheets of mulberry paper. Each carried the authority of the Khan himself, the voice of an empire that stretched from the Pacific to Persia. Polo wrote that the Khan makes his subjects accept these notes and pay with them. And they take them willingly, for they are of such quality that no one refuses them. Willingly. That was the secret. Not coercion, not fear, belief. The same belief that Europe had once placed in gold now lived in paper. And the realization shook him. He could not unsee it. A civilization ruled not by weight, but by imagination. By a single truth too radical for his world, that value is a story the powerful agree upon. Polo's pen trembled with awe and irony. He described how merchants across the Khan's domain traded silk, spices, and jewels with slips of paper, and how the system never broke, because it was built not on metal, but on confidence. Confidence that invisible metal no empire can mine. To a Venetian raised on coins and ledgers, this was sorcery. He watched peasants, nobles, and generals alike exchange notes backed by nothing but imperial will. No vaults of gold, no chests of silver, just the word of a ruler whose authority was infinite. And perhaps, Polo realized, that infinity was the real currency. Europe's merchants carried scales. Asia's emperors carried belief. And belief, as it turned out, weighed far less and traveled far faster. He returned home after 17 years older, wiser, unbelieved. Because no one in Venice, nor Genoa, nor Rome, could accept that paper could rule men's hearts as gold did. They laughed. They called his tales exaggerations, fantasies. How, they asked, could a piece of paper buy bread? And yet, behind their laughter was fear. Because if Polo's words were true, then Europe was already obsolete. Its coins, its vaults, its centuries of hoarded metal, all relics of a slower faith. For the first time, the West glimpsed that the East had outgrown its God. Imagine the humiliation, the self-proclaimed cradle of civilization, learning that progress had been reinvented by those it once dismissed as barbarians. Gold had been Europe's gospel. It sanctified kings, funded crusades, and justified conquest. But Polo returned preaching a heresy that trust could be printed, that authority could exist without ore or anvil, that belief itself could be minted into power. It was blasphemy dressed as commerce. He told them about the Khan's treasury where no metal clanged. No guards carried chests, only scribes, seals, and sheets. He told them how merchants grew rich carrying nothing but confidence. He told them of markets that never ran out of coins because coins were no longer necessary. And Europe listened not to believe, but to remember. because even disbelief plants seeds. Those seeds would sleep for centuries, but when they awoke, they would change everything. For the idea of paper money was not just economic, it was existential. If value could exist without substance, then power could exist without blood. And that frightened everyone who ruled through metal and sword. So they mocked him. Better to ridicule revelation than face it. But history has never been kind to those who laugh first. Centuries later, European bankers would rediscover Polo's fantasy and rename it innovation. They would issue their own notes, print their own promises, build their own empires of ink. And in doing so, they would forget the warning hidden inside his marvel. Because Polo hadn't just described prosperity, he had described illusion. In the Yuan court, paper money worked because belief was absolute. Disobedience meant death. In the West, belief would be optional and therefore volatile. When faith becomes free, it also becomes fragile. The Europeans took the form, but missed the spirit. They saw the paper, not the discipline behind it. They thought they could copy trust the way one copies a signature. And for a while they did. But every empire that imitates without understanding inherits the original's downfall. The Mongols eventually collapsed under the same spell. When greed met ink, inflation followed like a shadow. The miracle of multiplication became the curse of excess. The same faith that gave paper value devoured it from within. Polo might not have lived to see that decay, but he sensed it. His words carried the tone of admiration, tinged with prophecy, as if he knew that every new god comes an old one too soon. He wrote of the paper's beauty, of the empire's order, of the efficiency that bordered on magic. But between the lines, you can hear a whisper. How long can this last? Because no civilization, however grand, can sustain infinite belief on finite wisdom. When Polo's book spread across Europe, it was read as adventure, not economics. Kings dreamed of his travels, not his truths. Merchants envied his roots, not his revelation. And yet, quietly, the minds that mattered, the bankers, the scholars, the schemers took note. They understood what gold worshippers could not, that the future belonged to symbols, not stones. The irony was exquisite. The man mocked as a liar became the prophet of the modern world. And in time, Europe's skepticism would turn into imitation, then obsession, then domination. Because the West has always been good at one thing, turning other people's faith into its own power. By the 17th century, long after Polo's bones had turned to dust, the first European banknotes would appear. And the same continent that once laughed at paper would now enslave the planet with it. But that is another chapter. For now, imagine the moment itself. A single man crossing half the world, returning with a story no one believes, holding in his hand a piece of paper that outweighed every coin in Christendom. The scene almost writes itself. A Venetian tavern, candlelight flickering, Polo unrolling a sheet of yellowed bark. His listeners leaning in, eyes wide, their laughter trembling with disbelief. He tells them the Khan commands the trees themselves to become money, that the empire obeys, that trade flourishes, that even priests accept paper as holy tender. Someone spits wine. Someone calls him mad. Someone whispers, if such a thing were true, we would all be rich. And perhaps, in that moment, Europe's destiny was sealed not by belief, but by envy, because envy is just faith wearing a mask of contempt. Polo gave them a glimpse of the future, and they pretended not to care. But deep down, they knew what it meant that gold's reign was ending, that the foundation of their world was cracking. He had seen an empire run on imagination, and imagination, once proven possible, is impossible to unlearn. The West would eventually follow, not because it understood, but because it could not bear to be left behind. They would turn Polo's marvel into machinery, his wonder into wealth. They would strip the spiritual skin from the idea and replace it with ledgers, interest, and law. They would make faith measurable, and in doing so, they would build the modern world, a world that worships abstraction, mass produces belief, and calls it capitalism. It all began with disbelief. A man returns from the ends of the earth, speaks of money that floats, of power printed from bark, and the civilized world laughs. But the joke, as always, was on civilization itself. Because the day Marco Polo described paper money to Europe was the day Europe's imagination caught fire. A slow-burning flame that would ignite banks, markets, stock exchanges, and debt the true heirs of the Khan's invention. The irony is delicious, almost divine. The East created money to make trade lighter. The West adopted it to make control heavier. What was born as convenience would evolve into conquest. But that transformation was still centuries away. In Polo's lifetime, it was only a rumor, a fragile spark carried home across oceans. Hidden between the lines of a travelogue, no one believed. Yet every empire begins as a rumor. And so, while Europe slept under the illusion of gold, a new empire was already forming, not of land or kings, but of credit, paper, and promise. The Mongols had built it. Polo had witnessed it. And Europe, in its arrogance, would perfect it. Perhaps that is the tragedy of discovery. The first to imagine rarely profits. The dreamers light the fire. The merchants sell the flame. Polo was a dreamer, and his dream was dismissed, then plagiarized, then weaponized. Yet, in the quiet irony of history, he remains the messenger of the greatest secret ever carried westward, that the true wealth of nations is not gold, but belief. He proved that value could travel faster than armies, cross borders without swords, survive without substance, and from that revelation onward, the fate of the world would never again belong to those who mined the earth, but to those who mined imagination. That was Marco Polo's true discovery. Not Asia, not silk, not spice, but faith itself. The kind you can fold, seal, and spend. And long after gold has tarnished, his revelation still gleams in every note, every credit, every promise signed but unseen. The miracle of money that moves by trust alone. The echo of the Khan's court, still whispering across centuries that belief, once printed, can conquer the world.